One of the best conversations that I have had in a long time about what happened at 1122 King Road in Idaho a year and a half ago was with Harvey Levin of TMZ fame. Harvey's a lawyer, and he has a long, long history of covering crime and justice. So imagine my surprise when he raised doubts about whether Bryan Kohberger could have pulled off that quadruple murder all by himself. He is not entirely convinced that a guy with no history of violent crime went floor to floor in a big house and killed 4 young people with only one knife. And Harvey says a jury might have a problem with that too.
Well, look, I mean, there is a lot of evidence here that links Bryan Kohberger to this crime. That said, I just do find it weird. And this is not to say that he did or didn't do it. But Ashleigh, somebody who has never committed a murder or, as far as we know, even a violent crime, going to a house that has 3 levels, 6 people inside and a dog, where he would go up to the 3rd floor, kill 2 people, go down to the 2nd floor, kill 2 more, knowing that there are other people in the house. And the only thing he's armed with is a knife, doing that with 6 people, never having committed a crime before, knowing that one of the people in the house is a guy who's much more athletic, bigger than him, who could have heard a scream when he killed the first 2 people, and he could have overpowered him. It's a little weird, don't you think?
Well, I was going to say you missed your calling as a defense attorney, but you didn't, because TMZ is really, really popular and successful, so you're doing just fine. But I will say this. I have a theory, Harvey Levin, and that is this. If he's guilty, and I have to preface, if he's guilty of this crime, he showed up thinking there'd be 5 girls. And he didn't expect a boy to be sleeping over, a very big boy, Ethan Chapin. And maybe, just maybe, that stunned him. He was overwhelmed, and the battle became pitched. And that was enough for him to say, after the 3rd victim, and then suddenly a very large 4th victim, that he needed to get out of there. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I hear you. But I do think that he knew that Ethan was around that house a lot, because he had stalked the house, if you believe the prosecutors, that they have numerous, they have evidence that he had gone there numerous times and just watched the house. So it sounds like he knew the lay of the land inside, which means he knew who was there. And Ethan's girlfriend was there, which is why he was there. And he slept over. So I don't know that he'd be oblivious to Ethan being there. But, you know, again, even if Ethan wasn't there, when he does this to the first person, you would assume there would be screams and that other people would wake up and see him. And unless he planned on taking everybody out of the house, somebody's going to ID this guy and it's game over. So, look, again, I'm not saying he didn't do it. I'm just saying the circumstances are boldly weird here, that he would think
boldly weird.
Get away with
yes. Yeah, I'm with you. I have always thought this, like, if he's guilty, how is it that a PhD student in criminology could think that you could pull it off? But for the fact it's a party house, and maybe that was the equation. Any of the screaming is going to be written off as partying. And as it turns out, from some of the early affidavits, Dylan Mortensen said that she heard Kaylee, it sounded like she was playing with her dog. Likely she was being murdered. And then she heard Xana whimpering and someone saying, you know, it's okay, I'm here to help. And that Dylan didn't think anything of it because it's a party house and it's so noisy.
Well, okay, but it was also 4:30 in the morning when this happened. And usually that's not when the party is at high pitch. And secondly, I think he knew they were sleeping. I don't think he would have gone in the house if he thought everybody was awake, roaming around. So I think he went in knowing it was quiet. And I'm not so much talking about the neighbors as I'm talking about people in the house. Unless he felt he could take out 6 people, that there was a huge risk that the first person would scream loud enough that everybody else would wake up. They would ID him, even if they didn't overpower him, and they would know exactly who it is. They'd give the description to the police and be arrested in 12 hours. So, you know, I just don't buy the party house theory.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.